My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 38 when I learned that a single signature had cost me everything. Not just money, my identity, my future, my worth. My parents told me it was routine paperwork. They smiled, handed me a pen, and said it was for the good of the family. I signed like a good daughter. But what they really did was erase me from the will, from my grandfather's legacy, from the life I was meant to have. They thought I'd stay silent, too loyal to question. But they forgot one thing: I may have been obedient, but I'm not stupid. The funeral was quiet, too quiet for a man like my grandfather. Harold Monroe had built a legacy from nothing stoic, steady, and fiercely private. But even in his silence, he was the gravity that held our family in orbit. When the last shovel of dirt fell onto his casket, something shifted. My mother clutched my arm a bit too tightly. My father's eyes were calculating, not grieving. 3 days later, I was still in a fog. Grief comes in strange ways sometimes, like a flood, other times like a slow bleed. I hadn't cried, but I hadn't slept either. So when my parents invited me to sit down at the kitchen table that morning, I thought nothing of it. The table was already set: 3 cups of coffee, a stack of papers with neon pink tabs, and 2 pens. My mother smiled like we were about to play a board game. "It's just a formality," she said, placing a manicured hand on mine. "You know how complicated real estate gets when someone passes. These are just transfers, sweetie. Legal housekeeping." My father nodded already, reaching for his coffee. "It's better to keep everything out of probate. Less mess for everyone. Your grandfather would have wanted it this way." I stared at the stack. Words like trust beneficiary and assignment leapt from the page. But there were too many paragraphs, too much legal jargon. My mother saw the hesitation in my eyes and leaned in with that syrupy warmth she always used when she wanted something. "We've already reviewed everything. It's all standard. You trust us, don't you?" Of course I did. I signed. Page after page, signature after signature. I didn't stop to read. I didn't question why my name was on so many lines. I didn't ask why they were both watching me so closely. I was a daughter doing what good daughters do, helping, supporting, trusting. The moment I capped the pen, I felt the energy in the room shift. My mother let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. My father stood up abruptly and took the documents without another word. There was no thank you, no explanation, just a subtle tension that thickened the air. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house grew colder, tighter. My parents began whispering behind closed doors. Doors that had never been locked were suddenly shut. Phone calls became private, muffled. Their routines changed. My mother, who once confided in me about everything from grocery lists to gossip, grew distant. My father, never the affectionate type, became even more detached. At first, I chalked it up to grief. We had all lost someone monumental. Maybe they were processing it differently. Maybe they needed space. But the feeling gnawed at me, like there was a door I wasn't supposed to open, a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. One night I woke up to the sound of footsteps and hushed voices. I crept down the hallway and paused near the kitchen. My parents were seated at the same table, the documents now replaced with a laptop and 2 glasses of wine. I heard my mother laugh softly, a sound that didn't match the solemn air of recent days. "It's done," she whispered. She didn't ask a single question. "She never does," my father replied. "It's better this way. She wouldn't understand the complexities. We're protecting her." I stood there frozen. My name hadn't been said, but I felt it. I knew it. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment I signed those papers, how they had smiled, how they had pushed, how I had trusted. Something was very, very wrong. The next morning, the house felt like a stranger. I moved through the halls with the sinking sense that I'd missed something crucial, like waking from a dream and realizing the world had changed without you. My parents' patterns were off, subtle but off. My mother no longer left her phone unattended. My father avoided eye contact over breakfast. Conversations died the moment I entered a room. I began to notice the details. My mother's voice dipped into a whisper whenever she answered calls. I saw her pause to listen outside her own door before stepping inside. My father's laptop, once left on the dining table, now travelled everywhere with him. And the doors, why were they all closed now? Even the pantry had a lock. I hadn't lived in a fortress before, but somehow I was now a guest in my own home. Something was wrong. Not grief, not stress, something darker. But suspicion, I told myself, was a slippery thing. It makes you see ghosts where there are shadows. I needed proof. It came by accident. One afternoon, I walked into the laundry room to find my mother's cardigan draped over the counter. It was the one she always wore during serious conversations, as she called them. I reached to fold it, and something dropped from the pocket. It was a small folded note, yellow legal paper, the ink slightly smudged. I almost put it back without reading. Almost. But my name was on it. Transfer complete. Evelyn unaware. Will confirm offshore adjustment next week. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. Transfer complete. Evelyn unaware. What kind of transfer offshore? What the hell had I signed? My heart raced as I refolded the paper and slipped it into my own pocket. Every instinct screamed that I had to confront them. But another voice, one I hadn't listened to in years, my own, told me to wait. To observe, to gather more. I couldn't afford to walk into a storm unarmed. So I played along. I smiled at dinner. I nodded during small talk. I listened as my mother rambled about neighbourhood gossip like nothing had changed. But I was no longer the woman they raised to be quiet and agreeable. I was watching. Later that night, I pulled out an old notebook and began scribbling timelines. The funeral, the signing, the shift in their behaviour, the note. I created columns, what I knew, what I suspected, what I needed to find out. I was building something, a map, a case, a weapon. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like a detective. Over the next few days, I noticed more cracks. My father pacing outside late at night with his phone pressed to his ear, my mother writing checks in the laundry room, then shredding receipts. I watched them like a hawk, calm on the surface but boiling underneath. Every slip, every whispered conversation, every frantic glance, they were leaving breadcrumbs. And I was following. I returned to the note again and again, analysing every word. Offshore adjustment. What did that mean? Money property. The thought made me nauseous. My grandfather had been meticulous with his estate. I knew he had left things for me, I felt it. But now that certainty felt like a dream someone else had lived. I kept the note hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. I scanned it, printed 2 copies, and emailed one to myself under a fake address. I didn't know yet what war I was walking into, but I was done pretending peace existed. They had lied to me. Worse, they had planned it, and now I had proof. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not even anger, resolve. This wasn't just about what they took. It was about who they thought I was. They were about to find out how wrong they'd been. It was nearly midnight when I heard them again. The walls in our house were old, thin, and poorly insulated. But until recently, I never realised how much was said after dark. I had stepped out of my room to get water, careful not to make a sound, when I caught their voices drifting from the kitchen. I froze in place, body tense, heart thudding quietly in my chest. She never reads the fine print, my mother said, her tone smooth like she was bragging over tea. That's why it was easy. My father responded, voice low and dry. It's done. Everything's filed. She has no idea she signed herself out of it. Legally airtight. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I simply stood there in the hallway, every word hitting me like a needle in the spine. I wasn't sure which stung worse, the betrayal or the ease with which they discussed it. I waited until the room went silent, until I heard chairs scraping against tile and the faint clink of dishes in the sink. Then I slipped back into my bedroom and locked the door behind me, hands shaking. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, mind spinning. What had I signed? What had they filed? What did they mean out of it? If there was any doubt left, it died that night. They'd done this on purpose. They'd planned it. And now I needed answers. I started by searching my grandfather's name, Harold Monroe. I found the usual obituaries, a few local news pieces about his charitable donations. He'd never been one for headlines. But then I stumbled on a 3-year-old article in a regional business journal. A short feature on the Monroe Foundation, the non-profit he started when I was a teenager. There it was, my name. Harold Monroe, known for his discretion and ethics, reportedly intended for his granddaughter, Evelyn Carter, to inherit stewardship of the Monroe Foundation upon his retirement. My stomach dropped. I reread the line over and over, making sure I wasn't imagining it. It was brief, buried, halfway through the article, but it was undeniable. He had named me, not my parents. Me. He wanted me to carry on what he'd built. That truth hit harder than anything they'd said in the kitchen, because now I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. They had stolen something that was meant for me. I printed the article, highlighted the line, and pinned it inside my notebook under the heading, Evidence. But what had happened between then and now? Why hadn't I heard anything from the Foundation directly? Was it possible they'd covered their tracks so well that even his associates were in the dark? I spent the next few hours diving deeper. Foundation records, IRS filings, leadership transitions. The public documents listed my mother as the temporary acting director, citing a vague clause about emergency succession. There was no mention of me. None. I was being erased. They'd taken my inheritance, sure, but worse, they had taken my name off the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. And they'd done it quietly, without confrontation, without a single, honest conversation. As the sun began to rise, I sat back in my chair, exhausted but electrified. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid, they always knew, and now I did too. I reached for my notebook and added another line beneath the article. If they thought I'd stay quiet, they forgot whose granddaughter I am. Because if they'd started this in secret, I was going to finish it in the open. 2 days passed after I discovered that article. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I kept my movements quiet, my questions casual, my expressions neutral. I needed more than hints. I needed undeniable proof, something no amount of charm or spin could refute. And strangely enough, it came when I least expected it. The mail had always been my mother's domain. She sorted it every morning with mechanical precision, tossing junk into recycling and scanning through the rest like a hawk. But that Thursday afternoon, I got home early from work and beat her to it. A small brown envelope was wedged between catalogues and a coupon flyer, no return address, no stamp, just my name in thick black ink, Evelyn Carter. The handwriting was unfamiliar. My stomach twisted. I stuffed it into my coat and took it to my room before anyone could see. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, aged and faintly creased. A post-it note was attached. You should have had this. I peeled it off and stared at the page beneath. It was a scanned section of what looked like a last will and testament. Harold Monroe, Last Will and Testament, Section 4, Designation of Foundation Successor. The Monroe Foundation shall pass to my granddaughter Evelyn Carter, to be held in trust until her 35th birthday, at which point she will assume full stewardship. I couldn't breathe. There it was. My name, my future, my grandfather's intention in writing. The paper even included his signature at the bottom, notarized. It was real, it was legitimate, and it was never supposed to disappear. The implications sank in fast and hard. Someone had removed this section, maybe the entire original version, from the final will that had been presented. Someone had deliberately cut me out. I clutched, the copy heart pounding, mind racing. Who had sent this, and why now, whoever it was, had access to documents they shouldn't, and they knew what had happened. That much was clear. But the deeper meaning was even more devastating. This wasn't a recent betrayal. This had been in the works for years. They had planned this, waited for the right moment, and acted the second my grandfather's body was in the ground. It all came rushing back, the way my mother smiled at the kitchen table that morning, the pink sticky tabs guiding me where to sign, the way they both exhaled when I put the pen down. They had counted on my obedience, my love, my inability to imagine betrayal from within my own family, and they'd used that against me. I scanned the document and backed it up to 3 different drives. Then I slipped the original into a plastic sleeve and hid it under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. It felt almost cinematic, like something out of a thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life, my family, my name. Later that night, I found myself standing in front of my grandfather's portrait in the hallway. I studied his eyes, searching for the man I used to know. His smile was faint but steady, the kind that said, "You'll understand when you're older." Maybe this was what he meant. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," I whispered. "But I see it now, and once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. This wasn't just about money. This was about legacy, about trust, about bloodlines and betrayal and rewriting history to serve someone else's ambition." And now, with a single envelope, the truth was back in my hands. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the words on that page. "The Monroe Foundation shall pass to my granddaughter, Evelyn Carter," as if saying it enough times would restore everything I'd lost. But memory alone wasn't enough. I needed someone who could validate what I now suspected beyond all doubt. So the next morning, I called Richard Laskin. Mr. Laskin had been my grandfather's attorney for as long as I could remember. He was quiet, cautious, and old-fashioned, the kind of man who still preferred faxes over emails. I remembered him from birthdays and holiday dinners, always a glass of red wine in one hand and a thick legal pad in the other. "Evelyn," he answered, his voice more gravelly than I remembered. "My goodness, it's been years." "Yes," I said softly. "I hope I'm not intruding. I have a few questions about my grandfather's estate." There was a pause. What sort of questions? I didn't want to tip my hand too quickly. I recently came across some legal documents, ones I don't fully understand. I thought you might help clarify them since you handled Grandpa's affairs. Another pause, heavier this time. "I haven't been involved with Harold's estate since a few months before he passed," he said. "Everything was transferred to another firm, I believe. Your mother's doing." I froze. "Transferred. Why, your grandfather didn't request it," he said carefully, "but I was told he wanted a more modernized team. It struck me as odd, but your mother insisted. She said it was Harold's wish." My skin prickled. "Do you remember if my name was included in any of the versions you handled?" A long sigh filtered through the line. "Yes, Evelyn. In fact, your name was central. He was very clear that you would take over the foundation, that it was built for you. I drafted that clause myself." My throat tightened. "Would you still have a copy of that version?" "Possibly," he said, "but I'd have to check the archives." When control of the estate was reassigned, I was asked to forward all active files to the new lawyer. After that, I was effectively frozen out. "Who was the new lawyer?" He hesitated. "I don't remember the name offhand." "I can look it up if you'd like." "Yes, please," I said, already opening a blank document to take notes. That would help a lot. We ended the call with the promise of a follow-up. I sat back in my chair, letting the gravity of what I'd just learned settle around me like thick fog. My grandfather hadn't replaced Mr. Laskin. My mother had. She had orchestrated the entire legal transition. And no one, not even me, had questioned it. I opened my notebook and added another entry to the timeline Richard Laskin removed without grandfather's request. Legal transition arranged by Mum. The pieces were falling into place, each one sharper than the last. This wasn't just betrayal, it was coordinated erasure. She had taken the original legal framework, cut me out, and replaced it with something new, something convenient, something that positioned her at the center of everything. And she had done it in the name of love, in the name of family. I looked around the room I had grown up in, suddenly unfamiliar in its silence. The woman who taught me to tie my shoes, who brushed my hair while humming lullabies, had surgically removed me from my own future. And somehow she had smiled the entire time. After my call with Mr. Laskin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something even worse lay buried beneath the surface. It wasn't just about a change of legal counsel. The way my parents had moved their precision, their timing, it felt premeditated, orchestrated. And if they had gone so far as to remove the family lawyer, what else had they changed? I needed to see the documents I'd signed, the ones with the neon pink tabs. That stack of paper I had barely looked at, trusting their voices, their smiles. I logged into the county's record system, using the reference number I'd scribbled from the post-it attached to the scan. From there I began digging. It took hours scouring public registries, estate filings, property transfers, trust updates. The language was dense, written to confuse, not clarify, but after wading through enough legal mud, I found it. A form labelled Authorization of Irrevocable Transfer of Trust Rights and Future Interest. My name was at the top, my signature at the bottom. But in between paragraph 5 caught my eye. The undersigned acknowledges full relinquishment of any and all rights, future claims or fiduciary interest in the Monroe Family Trust, the Monroe Foundation, and any other related estate assets as described herein. Relinquishment. Any and all rights. Monroe Foundation. I felt physically ill. They hadn't just hidden something from me, they had erased me, and I had signed it. I scrolled back up. The title of the document had been softened, Authorization of Asset Management. It sounded harmless, even helpful, something a responsible family member might sign to assist during grief. But the real content was an excommunication. I stared at the screen, rereading my own signature. The loops of my name looked unfamiliar now, like a stranger had taken my hand and guided it across the line. This was the paper. This was what I had given them. The pen hadn't been a tool, it had been a knife. And I'd handed it to them. I stood up, pacing my room like the walls were closing in. My vision blurred, my ears rang. I wanted to scream, to tear the laptop in half, to run downstairs and demand answers. But the feeling that gripped me most wasn't rage, it was abandonment. Not just by them, but by me. How could I have let this happen? How had I not seen it? I sat back down, pressing my palms to my eyes, willing the tears not to fall. But they came anyway, hot, bitter, ashamed. They'd known I wouldn't read it. They'd counted on that. Just sign here, honey. It's all standard. You trust us, don't you? Of course I had. And that trust had been weaponized against me. I pulled out the scan of my grandfather's original will, holding it next to the digital version of the transfer document. One named me as successor, the other stripped me of every right to that legacy, and both bore my name. The same name they'd used to gain access, the same name they had no intention of honouring. I didn't know what step came next. All I knew was this: I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't been left out by accident. I had been cut out on purpose, and they had made me complicit. They'd convinced me to sign away my own future. And now, with trembling hands, I knew exactly what had to come next. The next morning, I waited until they were both in the kitchen. My father was sipping black coffee, scrolling through a real estate site on his tablet. My mother stood by the window, clipping herbs into a ceramic jar like we were still living in some tranquil, well-adjusted household. I stepped in slowly, gripping the back of a dining chair, steadying myself. "I need to talk to you," I said. They both looked up. My mother smiled automatically. "Of course, sweetheart." I held her gaze. "I need to know what I signed." The smile faltered just for a second. My father lowered his tablet. Silence settled over the room like fog. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, turning fully to face me. I said, voice tight, "the documents, the ones with the pink tabs. I want to know exactly what they were." My father cleared his throat. "It was just standard trust paperwork, Evelyn. Nothing complicated. Probate protection. Remember, we talked about this. No, I said. You told me. I didn't ask. I didn't know what I was signing. And now I do. My mother crossed her arms. It's a bit more complex than you're making it sound. Then explain it, I challenged. Because from what I've read, I signed away my rights to the Monroe Foundation, to the trust, to everything Grandpa intended for me. She stiffened. That's not how it works. My father stood up. Let's not do this now. No, I snapped louder than I intended. We're doing it now. What exactly did I sign, and why didn't you tell me what it was? My mother looked toward the window, exhaling like I was being difficult on purpose. You were overwhelmed. It was right after the funeral. We didn't want to burden you with legalese. You didn't want to burden me, I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. So you let me sign away my inheritance without even telling me what it was. You let me give up everything. Grandpa left me, and you think I'm overreacting. My father's voice turned cold. It was for the good of the family. You don't understand the pressure we were under, legal obligations, tax penalties. These things get messy. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. This isn't about taxes. This is about control, about you wanting to keep me out of it. You used my grief. You used my trust. My mother stepped closer, her tone softening, but her eyes stayed cold. You're being dramatic, Evelyn. You still have a home here. We've always taken care of you. I laughed, but there was no humour in it. No, you took care of yourselves. You smiled and handed me a pen and erased me from Grandpa's will. And now you want to act like it was some kind of administrative error. We didn't erase you, my father snapped. You signed it. That was your choice. Based on your lies, I shot back. You told me it was standard. You never once said it meant giving up my legacy. Because you wouldn't have understood it anyway, he muttered more to himself than to me. There it was, the sentence that cracked everything open. I stood still, let the words ring through the kitchen like a verdict. You never thought I was smart enough, I whispered. Not strong enough, not capable. My mother's silence was confirmation. They'd never believed in me. Not really. I was useful when compliant, inconvenient when curious, and now that I was asking questions, I had become a threat. I turned to leave. Where are you going? My mother asked. To find someone who will explain, I said. And this time I'll read every word. The confrontation left the air thick and sour. No yelling, no plates thrown, no dramatic exits, just silence. A silence that felt heavier than any argument. I stayed away most of the day, driving nowhere in particular, my thoughts, a chaotic swarm of memories, questions, and rising fury. That evening, when I returned, the house was quiet again. My mother's car was gone, and my father had disappeared into his study. I took the moment to breathe, to centre myself. I didn't expect anything new to unfold that night. But fate had other plans. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. A miracle. My mother never left her phone unattended. It was practically an extension of her arm, always within reach, always clutched like a lifeline. But tonight, by some stroke of irony or divine justice, she had left it unlocked, lit up, and lying there unattended. I hesitated. A part of me screamed, "Don't do it," but another part, louder and fiercer, whispered, "You have to know." I picked it up. The email app was open. Subject line trust, finalization, Monroe. I tapped hands, trembling, my pulse loud in my ears. It was a back and forth thread between my mother and a lawyer named Trent Marcus, a name I didn't recognize. But the content was a firestorm. I scrolled through dry legal exchanges, confirmations of asset transfers, document filing schedules. Then I hit a message that made my breath stop. From Diane Carter to Trent Marcus. Date 2 weeks before the funeral. Don't worry, the paperwork is ready. She trusts me. Always has. She won't read a word of it. Trent had replied, "Still make sure she signs in front of you. Legal protection matters." Then my mother again, "She will. She's grieving. She'll do what she's told. She always does." Then one final reply, time-stamped just 2 days before I signed everything. "Good. Let me know when it's done. Don't stress, she'll never question it. The girl's too grateful for scraps to ever sue." My hands were shaking. The girl's too grateful for scraps. That sentence didn't just slice it gutted. It rewrote everything I thought I knew about how they saw me. Not as a daughter, not as family, as a liability, as someone weak, easily handled. A pawn. I snapped a photo of the email, then another and another, documenting the entire thread. I sent them to my private email and deleted the recent history. Every move was fast, surgical, instinctive. I put the phone back exactly as I found it and stepped away, my stomach twisted in knots. It wasn't just manipulation now, it was premeditated betrayal. They knew I wouldn't read, they knew I wouldn't fight, and they were counting on that. I went upstairs, closed my door, and stared at the wall, not crying, not raging, just unraveling. All those years I thought their control was care. I thought obedience was love. I thought if I stayed small, they'd protect me. But they never intended to protect me. They intended to erase me. That night I didn't sleep. I created a new digital folder titled Truth and dropped every screenshot into it. I labelled each one. I cross-referenced dates and added them to my growing timeline. Because now I wasn't just suspicious, I was preparing for war. The next morning I woke with purpose. My hands were still shaky, but my mind was clear. There was no longer any doubt about what had happened or who had done it. I had the screenshots, the scanned will, the note from my mother's pocket. But scattered truths aren't justice. I needed a case, a strategy, a way to bring it all into the light where lies go to die. I started with a Google search, legal aid services, estate fraud-free consultation. Several names popped up, but one caught my attention, an office downtown that specialised in estate disputes and family trust conflicts. I called immediately, my voice even though my heart pounded. The receptionist transferred me to a paralegal named Mia, whose voice had the calm confidence of someone used to dealing with emotionally broken people. I didn't tell her everything, not right away, just enough. "I think I signed something I didn't understand," I said. "And I think it cost me my inheritance. My parents handled it all. I trusted them. But now I don't." She listened quietly, then asked, "Do you have documents? Emails? Anything that suggests coercion or manipulation?" "I do," I said. "I have a copy of the original will too, one that names me as the successor." That changed her tone. She became sharper, more focused. "Can you come in this week? I'll be there tomorrow," I said. Hanging up, I felt the first small wave of relief. Not hope relief, like someone had opened a door I didn't know was there. The rest of the day, I became a woman possessed. I printed everything, screenshots, emails, the digital scan of the will, even the timeline I'd written by hand. I labelled folders, I bookmarked statutes, I read legal articles about undue influence, fiduciary misconduct, and fraudulent inducement. I highlighted terms I didn't understand, then looked them up. It was overwhelming. There were moments when the weight of it all made me want to curl up and disappear. But every time doubt whispered that I was in over my head, I thought of that line, "The girl's too grateful for scraps to ever sue." And suddenly I was fueled again. By sunset, I had assembled a binder tabbed, labelled and ready to present. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, tangible, a symbol that I wasn't just another casualty of family manipulation. I was fighting back. That night I sat alone on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky darken. My parents were inside oblivious, still playing their roles, still assuming I was grieving fragile passive. They didn't know I was building a case. They didn't know I'd already made the first call, but I knew. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a storm gathering force. The night before my legal consultation, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor of my room, then the hallway, as if answers might suddenly manifest themselves in the stillness of the house. Something in me kept circling back to my grandfather, not just the will, not just the articles, but the man himself. He was meticulous, methodical, and always left trails for those who knew where to look. At 3 a.m., I found myself standing in front of the hallway closet, the one filled with dusty photo albums, old linens, and forgotten electronics. My fingers moved almost without thought, digging past layers of outdated cords and VHS tapes until they landed on a small grey recorder, one of those old handheld voice devices he used when his arthritis made writing difficult. I stared at it for a moment, then turned it on. It clicked word faintly, then started playing. Static. Then a click, then his voice. Harold Monroe, October 8th? The voice was gravelly but steady. Note for richer draft language regarding the Monroe Foundation succession. I want Evelyn listed, no substitutions allowed. The foundation is for her. She's the one with vision. The others want comfort. She builds things. She leads. The air left my lungs. I sat down slowly on the floor of the hallway, clutching the recorder like it was holy. The tape continued. If anyone tries to change that, stop them. This isn't a discussion. I'm making it clear now so there are no misunderstandings later. Evelyn gets the foundation, period. Silence. Then another softer, almost wistful line. She won't see it coming, but I hope she rises when it does. My throat tightened, my hands trembled. I replayed it again this time, recording the audio on my phone. I labelled it Monroe Verbal Will and backed it up instantly. There it was clear, spoken, dated evidence that my grandfather's wishes had been crystal. And someone had buried them, that someone was living just downstairs. I sat there for a long time trying to understand how people could do this to their own daughter. Not just lie, but manipulate, rewrite, erase. And for what? More money control. A legacy that was never meant for them. The betrayal deepened not just of me, but of my grandfather. His voice had always been calm, thoughtful, even in frustration. And yet in that one recording, I heard something else to urgency, a knowing that someone would try to steal what he had built. And he was right. I added the file to my binder, writing out a full transcript. Then I wrote a note to myself in bold marker. On the back of the final page, he chose me. They just didn't want to accept it. That morning, as the sun broke through the trees and lit the kitchen window, I sat with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't afraid anymore. The burden of not knowing had lifted, the fog had cleared. This wasn't speculation now. This was war with receipts. The courthouse smelled like old wood and tension. I stood outside, courtroom 3B binder in hand, my pulse thudding in my throat. My attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana Kelly, stood beside me, flipping through her notes. She'd reviewed everything, emails, the scanned will, the voice recording, and believed we had a real case. But belief didn't guarantee justice. That's what courtrooms were for. When the doors opened, I stepped into the room and saw them, my parents, sitting side by side in muted earth tones, as if carefully coordinated. My mother's makeup was just dramatic enough to hint at stress. My father had a soft expression of weariness, like a man burdened by ungrateful children. I wanted to laugh. The judge entered. We stood sat, and then it began. Their lawyer went first. Your Honour, this is a case of misinterpretation and emotional misguidance. The plaintiff, Ms. Carter, willingly signed all legal documents. She was not coerced, threatened, or misled. The signatures are hers. The filings are legitimate. This is at best a family misunderstanding. I clenched my jaw. Then came the parade of character framing. They portrayed me as a distant, unstable daughter, one who had been financially dependent her whole life and who now sought to rewrite legal history out of entitlement. My mother nodded along, solemnly, eyes cast down. My father dabbed his brow with a handkerchief, shaking his head, as if this spectacle pained him. It was a performance. But I had receipts. When it was our turn, Dana rose with the confidence of someone who'd seen this kind of theatre before. Your Honour, she said, we are not here to challenge emotion. We are here to present facts. She walked through the evidence one piece at a time. The email thread between my mother and the lawyer. The scanned portion of the original will naming me as successor. The hidden voice recording from my grandfather clearly stating his intentions. The document I signed under emotional manipulation misrepresented in both language and urgency. She showed the jury my mother's email. She'll never question it. She read aloud the lawyer's reply, too grateful for scraps to sue. Murmurs rose in the courtroom. The judge called for quiet, but I saw it the shift. The way the jurors leaned in now, eyes focused, faces hardening. Then Dana invited me to the stand. I told my story, calmly, clearly, truthfully. I spoke of grief, of trust, of how I'd always believed that being a good daughter meant saying yes. I spoke of the silence that followed my grandfather's death, of the documents I never read, of the cold shift in my parents' behaviour. I told them about finding the note, about the hidden tape recorder, about the emails I was never meant to see. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply told the truth. When I stepped down, I didn't look at my parents, because for the first time, they were the ones under scrutiny. Cross-examination was where things began to unravel. My mother went first. She answered each question with grace, calculated hesitation, and an occasional tear. She claimed she had acted with Evelyn's best interest at heart, and that everything was done to protect the family. She admitted to not fully explaining the documents, but insisted it was out of fear that I was too emotional to handle the complexities at the time. She's always been sensitive, she told the courtroom. We didn't want to overwhelm her. Dana leaned forward. Do you consider manipulating your daughter into signing away her inheritance a form of protection? My mother flinched but maintained her poise. That's not what we did. Then it was my father's turn. At first he kept to the script, calm, measured, controlled. He deflected questions with legal-sounding phrases, referenced tax complications, talked about trust structure realignment, as though that somehow justified deception. But the more Dana pressed, the more he shifted in his seat. When did you decide Evelyn wasn't fit to manage the foundation, she asked. I never said that, he replied. Then why remove her name from every designation? She signed it, after being told it was standard paperwork. She should have read it. Did you rely on the fact that she wouldn't? He didn't answer. The room grew still. Dana moved in. Did you ever once consider informing her that the documents would remove her from the Monroe Trust entirely? It wasn't relevant, he muttered. Not relevant, Dana asked. Your daughter was designated as the foundation's successor. You helped remove her from it. And that wasn't relevant. She didn't have the experience, he snapped. She's not a leader. Dana tilted her head. So you made that decision for her? I made the right decision, he said louder. For whom? For the foundation. For the family. Then Dana paused, looked directly at him. Is it true, Mr. Carter, that in an email from your wife, she stated Evelyn was too grateful for scraps to sue? Do you agree with that? His jaw tightened. That's not my language, but do you agree with it? He didn't respond. She waited. Then almost imperceptibly, he cracked. She's always been, he began, then stopped. Dana leaned closer. She's always been what? He looked directly at me then. His eyes didn't carry warmth or regret. They were cold, dismissive. She's always been a disappointment, he said. Useless in anything that matters. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Mr. Carter, the judge said sternly. But my father wasn't done. We gave her everything. And what did she do with it? Nothing. Always needing help, always needing direction. You think Harold wanted that running his legacy? She's a liability. A beat of silence. Then Dana turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the witness has just confirmed what this entire case is about. Control, dismissal, and betrayal. Not based on law, based on opinion, based on bias. The judge ordered a recess. I sat perfectly still as the courtroom cleared, my ears ringing. I hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected him to lose it like that. But deep down, I knew it was inevitable. For the first time, he'd said aloud what he'd always implied: I was expendable. But not anymore. The bailiff walked past and offered a subtle nod. Dana sat beside me, calm and satisfied. That, she whispered, was the moment the jury turned. The courtroom was hushed as the judge delivered the final ruling. The court finds that the transfer of assets was obtained through misrepresentation and coercion. The documents signed by the plaintiff are deemed invalid, and her position as the primary beneficiary and successor of the Monroe Foundation shall be reinstated effective immediately. I didn't cry, I didn't cheer, I simply breathed. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I truly breathed. My parents sat motionless at the defense table, masks slipping with every tick of the second hand. My mother's hands were folded too tightly. My father's face had gone pale. They didn't look at me, not once. Not as I stood, not as the judge finalized the paperwork, not even as I exited the room. Outside the courthouse, I stood beneath a sky-threatening rain and felt nothing and everything all at once. It wasn't elation, it wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. The truth was now public record. And the house I'd grown up in, where I'd been tricked and belittled and made small, was now legally mine. I returned to it 2 days later with a moving truck, 2 friends, and a list. My parents were already gone. They'd cleared out most of their belongings, but they'd left traces behind, photos of staged family gatherings, expensive furniture, bought with my grandfather's money, the smell of their cologne still lingering in the upstairs hallway. Room by room, I stripped it all. The heavy mahogany furniture went first. The oil paintings, the dusty curtains, the sharp-cornered reminders of false security. I donated what I could, tossed the rest. I repainted the walls in soft greens and blues, filled the air with the scent of clean linen and lemon. I made the space mine, not just legally but emotionally. But in the master bedroom, while clearing the top shelves of the wardrobe, I found a box I didn't recognize. It was tucked behind a stack of blankets sealed with yellowed tape and labelled in handwriting. I knew immediately, Evelyn, for later. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single envelope, thick and carefully folded. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's script. I sat down on the bed and opened it slowly, the edges crackling with time. The letter was long, 3 pages of his handwriting, dated just 6 weeks before he passed. It wasn't formal, it wasn't legal, it was personal. He wrote about his hopes for me, about watching me grow into someone with spine and fire, even if I hadn't realized it yet. He admitted that he had once considered leaving the foundation to my parents, but had changed his mind years ago after watching how they operated behind closed doors. They care about image, he wrote. You care about purpose. Then came the line that hit hardest, I'm sorry for what they might try to take from you. But I believe you'll take it back because you were always meant to lead, not follow. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw the teardrops stain the ink. He'd seen it coming, all of it. And somehow even from the other side, he'd reached back through the mess to place this one last truth in my hands. I read the letter again the next morning, this time slower, letting each word settle deep. Near the end of the 3rd page, just before his sign-off, my grandfather had written something that stopped my breath. I believe you'll overcome all of it, because I've always known they would betray you. The words didn't just wound, they confirmed every suspicion, every sleepless night, every gut instinct I'd tried to ignore. He knew. Not vaguely, not theoretically. He knew my parents, his own daughter and son-in-law, would choose ambition over love, over blood, over me. And yet he still believed in me. That twist, his quiet knowledge of their future betrayal, didn't feel like bitterness. It felt like legacy, like a man who understood the nature of people, but who still chose to plant hope where decay had taken root. I sat with the letter pressed to my chest and cried harder than I had during the trial, but these tears were different. Not grief, not loss, release. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't failed. I hadn't misunderstood what he wanted. They had betrayed me, but he had trusted me. In the weeks that followed, I settled the estate, met with the board of the Monroe Foundation, and assumed my role as successor. It wasn't easy. There were still skeptics, still whispers about courtroom drama and family rifts, but my presence at the head of that boardroom table wasn't performative. It was earned. I reorganized the foundation's priorities. We focused less on legacy-building events and more on grassroots change. And I started something new, something personal, the Carter Fund, a grant program under the Monroe umbrella specifically for women who'd been manipulated, disinherited, or legally blindsided by their own families. We provided legal counsel, advocacy, and emotional support, quietly at first, then publicly. In the first year, we funded 42 cases. In the second year, 112. Each time I stood in front of a room filled with women who had once believed silence was the price of love, I felt that old ache turn into something else, something useful, something powerful. I still kept the letter. I kept the recording. I kept the binder, faded and torn now from the trial, as a reminder of where I'd started and what it had cost me to claim what was mine. My parents never reached out, not once, but they didn't need to. The silence told me everything, and for once I was grateful for it. In that quiet, I rebuilt, I reclaimed, and I created something louder than their betrayal, my own legacy.